When I was about 8 years old, I used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house in Illinois. They had a good-sized chunk of property in a very rural area with lots of space to run around, and I always loved spending time there as a kid. They had a decent-sized cornfield, about a quarter-acre of raised beds with fruits, vegetables, and herbs, and a greenhouse that was about the size of a small garage. Some of my earliest and best memories are running around on their property, shooting BB guns, eating strawberries right out of the garden, and learning how to throw a ball with my grandpa because he was a huge baseball fan. It was a different time back then, too. They were from the generation that kind of told you to go outside and play and not come back until dinner. No helicopter parenting, and they thought kids should learn from their own mistakes. They let me roam pretty much anywhere I wanted to go, even at an early age, and figured if I got a little banged up, that was just part of growing up. On the holiday weekend before school started, I was staying with them, and I was just out wandering around like an 8-year-old boy does. At some point, I went into the edge of the cornfield and was walking through one of the rows and looking up at the sky. I was afraid to go too deep into it because my older brother used to tell me if I went in too far, I'd get stuck and I could never come back out. But I walked in far enough where I couldn't see the house anymore. While I was in there, I remember looking down a row and seeing this open area more toward the middle of the field, and I didn't know what it was. It was farther in than I ever went, but I was curious, and for whatever reason I walked toward it. When I got to this opening, I realized there was a big circle that had no corn in it. I can't remember now if the corn had been flattened or was dead on the ground. I only remember it being empty. I was young, so the details are fuzzy, but what I do remember, and I remember this very clearly, was seeing another boy about my age standing right on the other side of the clearing. Being a kid and also being a little bored out there by myself, I walked right over and started talking to him. The first thing I asked him was what he was doing out in my grandparents' field. I distinctly remember him telling me that he was just visiting. I figured he was visiting from out of town and came from a neighbor's property. I remember asking him if he wanted to come back to the house and play, and I told him my grandpa would help us set up the BB gun to shoot cans, but he said he couldn't, and again said it was because he was just visiting. I think I only talked to him for a few minutes and then walked back to the house, but looking back, it was weird how many times he said he was visiting. At the time though, I didn't think twice about it. I walked away and left him out there and then went on with my day. The only other part I remember was looking back once and seeing him standing there watching me leave. After that day, I honestly never thought about it again, not even once. It was just one of those random memories that fades away like everything else from being a little kid. About 4 years later, when I was 12, my grandpa passed away. He had been a smoker his whole life and got lung cancer that spread to his brain. After he was gone, my grandma stayed in the house by herself for a long time. As she got older, our whole family would pitch in to help her by taking care of the house and the landscaping, fixing things as they would break around the house, and keeping her company. But life just kept moving forward. In 2015, my grandma, who almost made it to 100 years old, passed away too. Not long after she was gone, my mom and her siblings all had to figure out what to do with the house and the land. No one really had the time or the money to keep it because it needed a lot of work by then, so after a lot of talks, they decided to sell it. Part of getting the place ready was cleaning it out. One afternoon, I went over by myself after work and I was going through my grandma's actual bedroom. While I was going through her closet, I found a box that was off to the side and covered with a bunch of other stuff. When I pulled it out, I realized it was filled with my grandpa's personal stuff. Opening that box hit me harder than I expected, and I remember sitting on the floor in the middle of her room with tears in my eyes going through it. There were old photos of them when they were young, and a set of car keys from what I'm guessing was a car he had owned and loved, and even ticket stubs from baseball games he had been to, a few of which he took us grandkids to. It was all just old, personal, sentimental stuff. As I got toward the bottom of the box, there was a single folded up page from a newspaper. It was a little aged, but when I opened it up, I saw that it was an article about my grandparents' property from the summer of 1988. The main photo at the top of the article was a picture of my grandpa standing in his cornfield with another guy in what looked to be a large section of flattened corn, and they were both looking down at it. Then there was a second, smaller photo of their house at the bottom of the article. Apparently, there had been a string of properties hit by unknown vandals that summer, and they were smashing down crops and making large, intricate patterns and shapes in some of the fields around where they lived. My grandparents' place had been one of the bigger ones, so the newspaper came out with a photographer and they did a story. Obviously, we now know these as crop circles, but in the article it didn't mention that term once, and it only talks about the police seeking information or eyewitnesses. I had never ever heard a single word about this growing up. No one ever mentioned it, not my parents or my grandma or anyone. For a minute, I felt like they were almost famous, locally anyway. I thought it was a really cool thing to find, but I mostly just shrugged it off and kept cleaning. It wasn't until I took a break and was sitting out on the back deck eating lunch and staring out toward where the cornfield used to be that something clicked. I remember that I had been staying out there the same summer that the newspaper article was published. Once that hit me, it all came back, and I remembered meeting that other kid out in the field. I had all but completely forgotten about it until that moment, and it hadn't even crossed my mind in 30-something years. It felt surreal, actually, and the more I thought about it, the weirder it seemed. I started to question why there had been a random kid standing alone in the middle of our field and where he came from. Then I wondered why, out of the entire field, he happened to be right in the part of the field that had strangely been flattened out like a crop circle. On top of that, my grandparents' property was fenced. Not with anything you couldn't get through, but enough of a boundary that you wouldn't just wander onto it by accident. I also remembered the way he kept saying he was just visiting over and over again, and how he never did leave the field while I was there. When I left, he just stayed there. At the time, it didn't seem weird to me because I was a kid, but thinking about it as an adult gave me chills. I don't know what to make of it, and I don't know what caused the patterns in my grandparents' field, but the fact that my grandpa kept the article tucked away in a box of personal things makes me think it meant something to him. Of all people, my grandpa would be the last person to believe in UFOs or anything like that. He just wasn't that kind of person, and he didn't have time for it. His motto was work hard and don't complain, and outside of work, he only ever talked about two things: his family and baseball. If he thought the newspaper story was worth keeping, then it had to have left some kind of mark on him. Now that I know what happened, I wish I had found out about it while my grandma was still alive. I have so many questions for her now. Maybe she had an explanation, or maybe she knew what my grandpa thought about it. I never even told them about the kid I saw out there that summer. Now the house is gone, both of my grandparents are gone, and I doubt I'll ever get any kind of answer or closure. All I have left is this distant memory of that day and a single newspaper article. Out of all of it, though, the weirdest part to me is that kid repeating that he was just visiting. I can't understand why an 8-year-old boy would keep saying that, and I really can't help but wonder, visiting from where? Last summer, my girlfriend and I had a crazy night that I'll never forget. We live in Vermont, just outside of Burlington, and we had decided to drive out to the Winooski River because we were bored. There's a little gravel parking area right off the road that is usually only used by people fishing, and it's a nice place to just hang out and listen to the water. We got there right around sunset and ended up sitting in the back of my truck with a couple of White Claws, just talking and enjoying how quiet it was. We were probably sitting there for a half hour, but at some point we noticed something flying toward us in the distance. I didn't think much of it because it just looked like a regular plane, but as it got closer, we both realized something about it wasn't right. It was flying way lower than you would expect a larger plane like that to be flying. I don't know exactly how high it was, but it looked like only a few hundred feet off the ground. It was low enough that it made us stop talking and stare at it, genuinely wondering if the pilot was having problems and we were about to see a plane crash. As it got even closer, we could see that it was towing something behind it, just like how a glider is pulled behind another plane to get it into the air. It wasn't super clear because it was pretty dark out, but we could still make out something trailing behind the main plane. From where we were parked, it looked like whatever was being towed was maybe 20 or 30 feet below the plane and about 100 feet behind it. The weird thing was, the closer it got to us, the less it made sense. The plane itself was normal, except it was a solid gray color. It definitely wasn't a commercial plane. It looked more like a military plane, but not a fighter jet. It had propellers, not jet engines. It was just this big, unmarked aircraft that didn't seem like it should be flying that low over a public area. We both started freaking out a little and asking each other out loud if it was going to crash. Right as it passed the other side of the river and essentially right over us, we got a full view of the entire situation. We could clearly see that the thing it was towing was this crazy-looking geometric-shaped black craft about the size of a sedan. It had angles on it that reminded me of a stealth bomber, but it was small, and I've really never seen anything like it. I don't know if this actually happened or not because it was dark, but it looked to us like it suddenly detached from the tether that was connecting it to the main plane. Then it shot forward, going from where it started behind the plane to about 100 feet in front of it, and definitely under its own power. When it jumped forward like that, it made this sound that I have no real words for. The best way I can describe it is it sounded like a loud version of an electric car. You know when you hear one driving through a parking lot or something, that weird sound they make? It was very similar to that and had a metallic ringing to it. It for sure wasn't using any kind of jet engine. We watched as they both flew past where we were on the river and away from us toward Burlington until we lost sight of them. After it was gone, my girlfriend and I just sat there staring at each other like, what in the world did we just see? After a few minutes, it started to set in, to me anyway, that we might not want to stick around. I had this gut feeling to leave after seeing something so weird, and whether it was some planned test flight or the pilots really were having issues and that's why it was so low, I didn't want to be near whatever was going on. We already had plans to go to a friend's house later that night, so we decided to just leave and head over early. It was the only thing we talked about on the drive over, and once we got to his house, we obviously spewed the entire story to our group of friends. By the end of the night, we had all decided that what we saw had to be a military test flight of some kind, but God only knows what that thing was they were towing. The next morning, my curiosity got the best of me. I had to go back out there and see if there were any signs of anything in the daytime. I went by myself, and when I pulled into the same gravel parking area, there was one guy loading his fishing gear into the back of his truck. I pulled up next to him and awkwardly told him that I had seen something there the night before, and then I asked if he had seen any planes flying over the river that morning. He said no, but wondered why I was asking, so I gave him a very condensed version of what my girlfriend and I had seen. Surprisingly, he seemed interested right away. He told me that just a week earlier, he had been fishing with his son in that exact same spot early in the morning, and they had seen the same black angled object fly right over the river. When he saw it though, there was no plane towing it, it was just by itself. He told me they didn't hear any sound coming from it over the sound of the river, but decided that it had to be a large drone of some kind. He did say it was the weirdest looking thing he or his son had ever seen. I had gotten out of my truck at this point and was standing there talking to this guy when almost miraculously, we heard a loud engine noise coming in the distance. We both turned toward the sound, and not even 30 seconds later, the exact same plane I had seen the night before flew directly over us. This time it was in full daylight and we could see it clearly. It was an all-gray military plane with propellers, again flying lower than you would expect. Just like before, there was a black object underneath it, but now it looked like it was fixed or attached to the bottom of the plane. It wasn't moving or being towed, it actually looked like part of the plane. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 seconds as it passed over us and flew onto the same path toward Burlington. We both stood there with our mouths open in total shock. It was just too crazy to believe. We had literally been standing there talking about it when it flew over again. I mean, it was the coincidence of all coincidences. After seeing that, we ended up talking for another 20 minutes while he finished loading his truck. I had just met this guy, but after that happened, he felt like a longtime friend. Neither of us could stop looking up at the sky, hoping to see it again, but that was all that happened. Later that same day, I had one last encounter, but from farther away. My girlfriend and I were out to dinner, and I told her about driving back out to the river and meeting the guy who was fishing. Then I told her how right as we were talking about it, we saw the same plane fly directly over again. She thought it was one of the craziest things that she had ever heard, and neither one of us could figure out what could be going on out there. After we left the restaurant and on the way back to her house, we could see something flying in the distance. As it got closer to the highway we were on, we could see that it was the same gray plane again. It was farther away this time, but definitely recognizable. I told her to grab her phone and try to get a video, which she did, but because it was later in the evening and she had zoomed in so far with her camera, the video just ended up being shaky and crappy. You can see that it's a gray plane with lights on it, but that's about it. Still, just seeing it again was enough to get my heart racing. I know we have a military base here, which I think is the Air National Guard, so part of me figures that all of this has to be some kind of military exercise. Maybe they're testing an experimental plane or drone and trying to hide it by keeping it attached to the bottom of a bigger, normal-looking plane. I don't know. But whatever that black craft was, it looked way more advanced than anything I've ever seen. The whole experience has really stayed with me since it happened, and I still think about it all the time. Every time I see a plane now, even a regular one, I get this little burst of adrenaline, wondering if I'm going to see something again. There's one last part I want to mention. About a month after everything happened, I was helping a buddy of mine who I hadn't seen in a while fix his car, and while we were working in his garage, I told him the whole story. As soon as I mentioned it, he immediately said he had seen the exact same thing. He had been with his family on Lake Champlain, and I guess he and his cousin saw the same gray plane with something weird underneath it. He also told me that another family member of his had worked at a nearby base for over 20 years, and apparently there are hangars out there that are completely off limits, even to most of the people who work on the base. According to him, there have always been rumors about top-secret aircraft and even UAPs being stored and tested there. I don't know if any of that is true, but after seeing what I saw, it doesn't sound all that crazy to me, and honestly, I kind of hope I see it again someday. Whatever it was unbelievable, and it made me realize there's a lot more out there that we don't know about. In 1991, I was only 2 years old, so I have no memory of what happened. Everything I'm about to share was told to me by my dad when I was 15. This is how the story goes according to him. At the time, my parents were living in a sparsely populated area outside of a larger town. They were renting their first house that was on 10 acres with a half-mile of gravel driveway that was shared with 3 other neighbors. My dad says it was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors, but also had enough space to feel like you were alone. One night after dinner, my dad noticed an unusually bright light coming down the gravel road. His first thought was that it was some kind of large truck or tractor, but something about it immediately seemed off. Since there was only one more house past theirs on the shared road, and they rarely got any outside traffic, he was curious and went to the window to see what it was. As he got closer, he realized the light was too high off the ground to be a car, and it looked like a single large ball of light that was following the road. By the time it was passing directly in front of the house, he said he had a perfectly clear view of it, and he had never seen anything like it. It was some kind of object about the size of a small car, and the color of it seemed to shift slightly as it moved. My dad immediately called my mom to the window, and she got there just in time to see it continue down the dead-end road until it disappeared around the last corner that led toward the neighbor's property. They barely had time to say anything to each other before they heard a loud rumbling sound. It was deep and it shook the windows, which made both of them run out to the porch to see what was happening. Above their house and flying in the same direction as the first thing was a large black helicopter. It was much higher up in the sky, but there was no question about what it was. They watched it fly over their house at an extremely fast pace, and it was out of sight in just seconds. This next part is going to sound crazy, but it's exactly what my dad experienced. Just after the helicopter had gone by, my mom was suddenly illuminated by a bright spotlight coming down from above them, but they couldn't tell what it was from. Without even thinking, my dad grabbed her arm to pull her out of the light, then pushed her back through the open door into the house. In doing so, he inadvertently put himself into this bright light. He said it felt like an immediate and overwhelming sensation of heat, and that was the last thing he remembers while standing on the porch. The next thing he knew, he was standing alone in our living room in what he describes as a state of suspended animation. It was calm and quiet and felt to him like time had stopped because he could see dust particles in the air that weren't moving. He couldn't move, but he could look around and noticed it was still dark out. He could also see the spotlight that he'd been under just moments earlier still lighting up the porch. It was like he had been moved 20 feet back into the house and was just stuck there. Standing a few feet to the side of him were two figures. He couldn't tell what they looked like, but they appeared to be talking to each other while also glancing over at him, almost like they were monitoring him. Then he looked toward the other side of the room and noticed a third figure kneeling down right in front of me. He said whatever it was leaning down with its face just inches from mine, and it looked like this thing was trying to pick me up. This immediately sent him into protective father mode, and even worse, he said I seemed excited and was completely unafraid of whatever was happening. My dad tried to move toward me but felt paralyzed from the neck down. All he could do was helplessly watch while this thing interacted with me. He said he felt an overwhelming surge of anger that was unlike anything he had ever felt before. His mind locked onto a fireplace poker that was sitting in a stand next to our fireplace, and the only thing he could think about was breaking free from this paralysis and swinging at these things with everything he had. Then, in a full-blown state of panic, his vision narrowed and he lost consciousness and has no other memories. When he opened his eyes, it was morning and he was lying in bed next to my mom. He jumped up and started shaking my mom awake, then frantically started asking her what had happened and if I was okay. My mom, who was completely startled and confused, told him to calm down and asked him what he was talking about. She had no memory of anything happening and thought he had had a nightmare, but my dad was adamant. He clearly remembered everything and he was certain something had really happened to us. As he tried to explain the light they saw and the helicopter and the people in the house that were trying to take me, my mom listened, but she kept insisting that everything was okay. At that point, she had already gone to get me from my room, and I was perfectly fine. I guess my dad had actually tried to call the police somewhere in there too, but my mom took the phone and told them how ridiculous it was to call them for something like that and how horribly embarrassing it would be if they actually came out to the house. He slowly started to come around to the idea that it was possible he had confused a horrible, vivid nightmare as reality. Even though when he tells me the story, he says he never could fully believe that. Things mostly went back to normal after that, but as the days went on, something started to bother my mom. The more she thought about that night, the more she realized her memory of it was spotty. She remembered eating dinner, but after that it was all very fuzzy. She couldn't remember going to bed, she couldn't remember shutting off the TV or turning off the lights, or most shockingly, putting me to bed. All the things that were part of their nightly routine were missing. It was like there was a gap. When I've talked to her about it, she admits that it was one of the weirdest nights she could remember, or not remember, and now believes something did actually happen, even if she doesn't know what it was. She still says she never saw a ball of light or a helicopter, but she also can't explain why her memory of it is so incomplete. My dad, on the other hand, has never once wavered from his story. He remembers every detail in perfect order, and it's never changed in all the years he's told it. With my mom admitting her lapse in memory, he is convinced it was real. He doesn't know what it was or why it happened, but he's certain it wasn't a dream. One thing he's made very clear is that because I was involved, it absolutely terrified him. For months after it happened, he refused to let me sleep in my own room and would put me between him and my mom in their bed at night. He even got this complex about checking the locks on the doors and windows multiple times a night, which is something he still does today. Looking back, I think that event permanently changed something in him. I'm extremely close to my dad, but he's always been on the overprotective side. Not in a controlling way, just in a way where he needs to know I'm safe at all times or he freaks out. It was annoying when I was a teenager, but I don't mind it now and I love him more than anything. I do think whatever he experienced, though, left a permanent mark on him. I'll never be able to say I know what actually happened to the three of us back then, but I know him better than anyone and I believe his story, every word of it.